Hi friends, I decided that I want to start just sitting down and talking about true crime too, not just doing my makeup with it, because I have such a passion for true crime that I just want to keep talking about it all the time. So we're gonna get comfy today. I'm sorry if you hear my children, I'm sorry if you hear my washer, I'm sorry if you hear my dishwasher. It's just inevitable. It's just inevitable. But I'm here. So I actually already filmed this story once, and then I'm editing it and I'm like, I sound so stupid, it's not even funny. So here is take 2 on the Boston Strangler. And disclaimer, this story does talk about sexual assault, murder, and some other pretty nasty things. So if you don't like those things, please click out of this video, and I'll see you guys in another one. So July 1962, headlines across every single newspaper talks about how some madman has strangled 4 people. So he had killed 4 women in the time span of a month, and women were claiming that they were getting phone calls saying, "You're next." So it just became, so the women of Boston became very, very fearful. They immediately were buying pepper spray. They were buying extra chains to bolt their doors shut. They were just taking every precaution possible to be careful. So between June 1962 and January of 1964, 13 women were raped and strangled by this mysterious killer. So now, typically murderers, when they go on a killing spree, most of their victims have very similar characteristics about them. Like, they have the same way that they part their hair. Like, if you look at Ted Bundy's, they all part their hair the same way. They all have similar builds, things like that. So it was kind of strange for this case, and it almost made people not want to think that it was done by the same person, because the only thing that these women really had in common were that they were single women, and when they were found, they were wearing nylon stockings. Those are the only things. Otherwise, their ages ranged from 19 to 85, and they were seamstresses, they were students, they were divorcees, they were widows. So this case is just really strange. A lot of these women, they were just killed in the middle of the day. And when police got to each crime scene, there was no forced entry. So they had to have known this man. Maybe he was a repairman. Maybe he was the building manager or something. But for some reason, they trusted him and they let this man in. Maybe they had gone on a date with him once or twice. They weren't sure, but there was no forced entry. So months in this just go by, and more women are being killed, and they're interviewing tons of suspects. Boston's a huge town. Like, there are multiple crimes, and they're trying to figure out, does this crime match with this crime? Like, are they kind of meeting in the middle? They're trying to figure everything out. So they interview all these people that they think are suspects, and none of them come up to meet up with the timeline at all. So then a group of private citizens, they come together and they want to pay for Peter Herkos. He is a phenomenal investigator, you want to say. They said that his special talent was psychometry. I have no idea how to say that properly. He worked on his own. He did lend his services to the Mason family murder investigation, which he actually pinpointed a suspect to police. He could just look at crime scene photos and tell them if the perpetrator was alone, or he worked alongside somebody else, or they did it this way, blah, blah, blah. He just could read their minds and kind of picture himself in the crime scene almost, if that makes sense. So during all of this, there then becomes this new perpetrator, and they call him the Green Man, because during all of his crimes he wears green, which is not likely at all. All right, where the hell were we? Okay, Green Man. The Green Man was not only tearing Boston, but Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. The Green Man had committed over what police believe 400 burglaries and sexual assaults, and 300 women had reported this. Because I really thought I could film this video with my kids awake. I should have realized that my last video was really bad and filmed it while they were still napping. That's fine. So during this time with the Green Man, obviously they're looking for the Boston Strangler while they're also looking for the Green Man. In October of 1964, a 20-year-old woman reports her sexual assault. She told them she woke up, she found this man in her house. He had a knife. He had then tied her up and assaulted her. So while this woman is being assaulted, she tells the guy, she's like, hey, these bonds that you tied me up in, like, they kind of hurt. And he listens, and he actually, like, loosens them up for her so she's not in pain. We have a visitor. So she is able to give police a sketch of this man, and so the police go ahead and they put the sketch in the newspaper. Multiple women start calling. They're like, hey, that's what my attacker looked like. And then police kind of look at the sketch and they're like, this guy looks familiar. So they kind of look into it and they find out that he looks exactly like someone who had performed sexual assaults before. This is when they came up with Albert DeSalvo. Albert DeSalvo was known to the police as the Measuring Man. His crime sprees began in the 1950s. He would go door to door looking for young women. He would say that he was a modeling agent and he wanted to come in and measure them, and while he measured them, he fondled with them. Then in 1960, the cops arrested DeSalvo after breaking into a woman's home, and he had admitted to being the Measuring Man. So right away they know that DeSalvo is a man that he just admits to anything. And he pled guilty and he received 18 months in prison. He then only served 11 months and got out on good behavior. And after he got out of jail, he was doing really good. So he got off the police's radar and they weren't someone that the police were worried about. So DeSalvo, at this time, after that woman had come forward and done the sketch of him, he was arrested on that singular rape charge. So after that singular rape charge, he was then sent to the Bridgewater State Hospital, where he met a fellow inmate, George Nasser. They hit it off. They became really good friends. They spent a lot of time together. They talked a lot. And then in February of 1969, Nasser, who is DeSalvo's inmate friend, calls his lawyer, and he's like, Nasser is like, hey, if the Boston Strangler came forward and like told his story, could he make some money? And so his attorney is like, what are you talking about? So our visitor's back. So Nasser tells his attorney about DeSalvo, claiming that he admitted to being the Boston Strangler, that it was him the entire time. So then DeSalvo goes in and talks to the hospital psychiatrist and admits to being the Boston Strangler after he becomes friends with George. People immediately kind of doubted, and so did police and investigators, that DeSalvo was the Boston Strangler. Yeah?
Papa.
That's not Papa, that's a random old man. So DeSalvo was actually able to talk about each of the crimes in great detail, give very specific details to anybody who pretty much asked. The hard part of this was there was no physical evidence tying him to any of the crimes that had occurred. While there was no evidence, the timeline of these murders kind of matched up. He was released from prison a week before the first Strangler killing happened. But again, he was the type of guy that if he was arrested, he admitted to it. He admitted to the first crime. Why wouldn't he admit to this one? He clearly craved that, like, oh, I'm the guy that did it. So why wouldn't he go ahead and admit to being the Boston Strangler? A psychiatrist actually who talked to DeSalvo said that, and I quote, a very clear, very smooth, compulsive confessor who desperately needs to be recognized. Again, like I just said, he loved to be recognized for those crimes. So DeSalvo, like, gets his lawyer, and they start talking, and DeSalvo even, like, convinces his lawyer that he's guilty of this crime. Well, nobody else believes that he is. Sadly, as they wanted this case to close, they couldn't because they believed that DeSalvo's confession was a lie. Albert DeSalvo in 1967 stood trial for the Green Man crimes. They found him guilty. They sentenced him to prison. They never even began a trial for the Boston Strangler cases. They just sent him to prison for the Green Man stuff. And after he gets put into jail for the Green Man crimes, he actually escapes jail, and then they find him obviously, and then they transfer him to a maximum security prison. So going back to George and Albert. So they became really weird friends, and a lot of people suspected that George was actually the Boston Strangler, and he wanted to make DeSalvo the killer, and they would both split the earnings from the publishing of the story. George's brother Richard actually went in to visit George and Albert. He's sitting there talking to both of them, and Nasser made it to where DeSalvo wasn't allowed to speak unless he told him he could speak. Kind of like, you know, when you're in prison, you make someone your bitch. He made DeSalvo his bitch. So, again, during this time, a lot of people thought that Nasser may have been the Boston Strangler. I love that my children are adding sound effects to this. So Richard goes back and he visits his brother George in his own time, and he looks at him, and I quote, "Do you want to know who the real Boston Strangler is? He's sitting right here." And Richard said that George's face just went to stone, like Medusa had looked at him. And then in 1973, DeSalvo was found stabbed to death in his cell. The killer or killers of DeSalvo were never identified. So after DeSalvo died, they also had no further leads. The Boston Strangler case just kind of wasn't their top priority. The case was still obviously open and investigators were looking at it, but it wasn't their high-profile case because they couldn't find anything. So 46 years go on. They're still trying to figure things out with the Boston Strangler case. And obviously there were no more victims because it was clearly either George or it was DeSalvo. We may never know. So in 2013, the police had a breakthrough using DNA on a water bottle belonging to DeSalvo's nephew, Tim. The police were able to link the final Boston Strangler victim, 19-year-old Mary Sullivan, to Albert DeSalvo. So the Y DNA with the genetic material passed through the male line in families was found on that water bottle, and it was almost an exact match. So that DNA on the bottle was almost an exact match to the semen found on the blanket that Mary was found on. So after that Y DNA match, they were given permission to dig up DeSalvo's body and get a better DNA sample, and that is when the match was 99.9% positive that it was DeSalvo. And this confirmed that DeSalvo was the murderer of Mary Sullivan, which closed her case, but it didn't close the other ones involved with the Boston Strangler. So the 12 other cases of the Boston Strangler still remain a mystery. There was no DNA found, so they couldn't match it to the water bottle and the semen and all that. So those cases are still technically open to this day. Yeah, I want to know what your guys' thoughts are. Leave them down in the comment below. Have you ever heard of this story? Is there something that you know that I don't know? Or we don't know, I guess? So, yeah. Bye. We will see you guys in the next one. Bye.